Alaska might be my second love. Right after Kashmir, I think it's the most stunning place on the planet. It was in Alaska when I had my first of dozens of encounters, all incredible with grizzly bears. The tallest moose I've ever seen laid down in front of my hotel room window one morning, and I was just so enthralled. The mountains, the small gauge railway from Skagway up to the Canadian border, wild ocean, lakes, streams, rivers. Fir trees filled with bald eagles looking for some salmon, and wild elk that have no real fear of people because they're used to being the ones in charge. There's almost nothing about Alaska that you fail to fall in love with. I lived next door in Yukon for a very long time, and it's a beauty too, but Alaska held my heart just a little tighter. But like all other places, Alaska has its dark side, and it has its even darker moments. Today's serial killer, Alaska's worst, is a tale of that side and those moments. For 12 years between 1971 and 1983, Alaska was haunted by a number of disappearances, a number of deaths, plenty of rapes, until Robert Christian Hansen, an import from Iowa, was captured. He targeted the most vulnerable, as so many serial killers and serial rapists do, but he would add an element of evil to his spree that few would ever match. When this man went on the hunt, he did it quite literally. Hansen's father was a Danish immigrant and a baker in Esterville, Iowa. When he was young, Hansen worked in the family bakery, which was in Pocahontas, Iowa. Like Andre Chikatilo, he was very shy as a kid, but he liked hunting and archery and spent a lot of time doing both. He was in the Army Reserves and worked as a drill instructor at a police academy before getting married in 1960. His childhood was pretty mundane, and then Hansen turned 21 and burned down the county school bus garage. Apparently, that was revenge for how unpopular he was in high school. Unlike many who start with smaller crimes, Hansen went straight to prison, getting 3 years for the arson. More interesting during that time was that he was diagnosed with manic depression and periodic schizophrenia. A psychiatrist would note that he was obsessed with getting back at people that he felt did him wrong. His wife would file for divorce while he was in prison. And then, so he's released and he gets into trouble for theft from time to time. He remarries in 1963 and has two kids. In 1967, the whole family moves to Anchorage, Alaska. Remember all those TV interviews when the police catch a very bad man and the neighbors are all shocked? They talk about how nice or quiet or friendly the bad man was, how surprised the neighbors are that there were bodies buried in the backyard. Well, same would happen here. On top of that, Hansen set quite a few hunting records in Anchorage. Pretty impressive for an area where so many are skilled big game hunters. At first, it seemed he left his life of thievery and vengeance back in Iowa, but in December 1971, Hansen would be arrested. First, for abducting and trying to rape one unidentified woman, and next for rape of a second unidentified woman. He would plead no contest to assault with a weapon for the first offense and get 5 years in prison. But he was put on work release after just 6 months and sent to a halfway house. In 76, there was another 5 year sentence for theft. He received psychiatric treatment for bipolar disorder, though, and the court would reduce his sentence to time served. Both times, after very short periods in prison, he would be back in the community, to the detriment of many, many women. We can't ever be certain, but it's believed that his first murder happened in December 1971. He abducted 18-year-old Celia Van Zanten. She was abducted on December 22nd. She would die of exposure, frozen to death after being dumped into a ravine by her abductor. Her body would be found on Christmas Day. He was never convicted for this crime, but the modus operandi matches Hansen, and authorities are confident that he is the one responsible. Now, this is Alaska. People go missing in Alaska a lot. Sometimes they're lost while on the land, hunting, backpacking, trekking, or what have you. Sometimes they're lost to a boating accident or fall into a raging river. Animal encounters have disappeared a few people, and sometimes there are folks who just don't want to be found. Some folks come to Alaska from the lower 48 with the specific hope of never being found. And then there are the people who, no matter how rough Alaska can be, no matter their circumstances or the obstacles that are in their way, are determined to live. They're survivors, resourceful, smart, and downright tough. Meet 17-year-old Cindy Paulson. Hansen would regret meeting her. She brought Hansen's reign of terror to its end, and she is the heroine of this story. It was June 13th, 1983, the height of the endless sunlight in Alaska. Cindy was working in the sex trade, and she ran into Hansen, who offered her $200 for oral sex. She got into his car. He pulled a gun. He drove her to his home on Muldoon, as he had done with so many of his victims. He held her captive there while he raped her and he tortured her. He put a chain around her neck, and the other end of that chain was attached to a post in his basement. For part of the time she was down there, he napped. And after his nap, he took her out to the Merrill-Field Airport. He made her crouch down in the back seat of his car with her wrists handcuffed together in front of her body. He had what he called a cabin. It was really a shack out on the Knik River in the Matanuska Susitna Valley. He could only get out there on a boat or in a bush plane. No problem. Hansen owned his own plane, Piper PA-18 Super Cub. He was loading up the cockpit of his plane, and Cindy was paying attention. She knew she would have little chance to escape once out at some remote shack, once out on the land. She had to do it now, so she crawled out of the back seat, opened the driver's side door, and ran like she was being chased by demons towards 60th Avenue nearby. Because she was being chased by demons. Hansen was chasing her. Cindy was fast enough, though, and got out to that road and flagged down a passing truck. And enter hero number 2, Robert Yount. He could have driven past, but here, coming at him with handcuffs on her wrist and looking disheveled and scared, was a young woman who stopped and picked her up. He drove her to the Mush Inn, and she jumped out of his truck there and ran inside. She begged the clerk there to call her boyfriend, who was at the Big Timber Motel, and she was safe. Yount left and went on to his work, but when he got there, he called police to report the whole thing. Police found Cindy over at the Big Timber Motel, where she was alone but safe in one of the rooms, and she still had those handcuffs on. She was smart, so clever. She left a pair of blue sneakers on the passenger side floor of Hansen's car before she escaped. She wanted evidence that she had been in the back seat of that car. She would tell the police all about Hansen. A friend of his, John Henning, would provide an alibi, though, and Hansen acted all meek and humble, and so he wasn't considered a serious suspect for a serious offense at first. He would tell police that Cindy was just mad at him because he would not pay extortion demands from her. He was not taken as a serious suspect, that is, yet. Alaska State Troopers were investigating a series of bodies that started showing up in and around Anchorage and Seward and that valley where Hansen had his little shack. There was one found by construction workers out on Klutna Road, who they called a Klutna Annie, and who still has not been identified. Then there was Joanna Messina, found in a gravel pit near Seward, and 23-year-old Sherry Morrow near the Knik River. Detective Glenn Floth was pretty certain that all 3 women were connected to the same killer. He called on the FBI for help and to get a profile done up, and just as with Chikatilo, that profile was bang on. Police went through suspects until they got to Hansen. The state troopers took Cindy's evidence far more seriously than the local police did. They took that and the profile and got a warrant to search Hansen's plane, his vehicles, his house. On October 27, 1983, they found jewelry belonging to missing women, firearms including a .223 caliber Ruger Mini 14, which was the murder weapon in many cases, and then the gold. They found the gold. An aeronautical chart with 37 tiny little X marks on it. It was a trophy Hansen kept hidden behind his headboard. The little X's would tell so much. Many of the bodies that had already been found matched X's on that map. And when investigators went to the remaining X's, they found more bodies. Hansen would typically abduct a woman and rape her, or try to, and sometimes those women were released. Other times he would kill them and dump them. And still other times he would load them up on that plane. He would take them out to that shack. There, he would take off their handcuffs and tell them to run. Run into the bush. Run away. Escape. And when they inevitably tried to run away from him, he would take that Ruger and hunt them. Literally. He would either stab them with a knife or shoot them, but he would hunt them down and kill them. He tried, as the evidence against him mounted, to deny any involvement. Then he tried to blame the women. Then he tried to justify the murders in any other way. Eventually, though, the evidence was so overwhelming, and with no one buying the humble, meek, bigger man act anymore, he confessed. At least 17 murders, at least 30 rapes and assaults. Victims from 16 years old through 41. Law enforcement would connect him to another 4 murders. He was convicted for 4 murders, though, only. Just the ones with the strongest evidence. Sherry Morrow, 23, whose remains were found on the Connect River a year after she went missing. Joanna Messina, 24, who went missing with her dog on May 19, 1980. She was found 3 weeks later. Klutna Annie and Paula Golding, 30, who went missing on April 25, 1983 and was discovered on September 2nd. He was charged too for what he did to our heroine, Cindy. There were also assaults, kidnapping, weapons offenses, theft, and insurance fraud. In his plea bargain, there was to be no press coverage of his crimes. He would serve his sentence in a federal prison, which are considered nicer than state prisons, and he would lead the police to several of the bodies. He would confirm a number of cases the police had worked on. He would deny a number of killings that lined up with that map, though, and he would hold back on some others. Hansen was sentenced to 461 years imprisonment. He died finally in 2014, a prisoner and Alaska's worst serial killer. His other victims that are either officially or can otherwise be confidently attributed to him are Megan Siobhan Emmerich, 17, from Seward. Mary Kathleen Thill, 22, who disappeared July 5, 1975, from Seward. Hansen would tell a fellow prisoner that he discarded her into Resurrection Bay. Roxanne Eastland, 24, disappeared on June the 28th, 1980. Hansen confessed to her murder, and her remains have never been located. Lisa Futrell was abducted September 6, 1980. She was 41. Her remains weren't found until May 9, 1984, buried near a gravel pit. Andrea Mona Altieri, who was also known as Fish, was 24 when she went missing on December 2, 1981. She was dumped into the Connect River, and her remains have not been found. Sue Luna, 23, disappeared May 26, 1982, after she met Hansen in a diner parking lot. She was discovered nearly 2 years later. A set of partial remains found in Palmer, Alaska on April 25, 1984 were called Horseshoe Harriet. She was identified through genetic genealogy just recently in October 2021 as Robin Pelkey, who had been missing since July 19, 1983. She was just 19 when she was killed. Delynn Renee Fry, also known as Sugar, was 22, and she went missing sometime in March 1983. Her remains weren't discovered until a bush pilot found them on August 20th, 1985. She was known as Jane Doe until 1989, when her jewelry was identified. Malai Larson, 28, she disappeared July 10, 1981, and was discovered near a parking lot on April 24, 1984. Teresa Watson, 22, was last seen March 25, 1983. She wasn't discovered until May 17, 1984. Angela Lynn Fettern, 24, who went missing sometime in February 1983, was found April 26, 1984 at a small lake near Figure 8 Lake. And Tamara Pedersen, who people call Tammy, was just 20, last heard from on August 7, 1982. She was found near the Old Connect Bridge on April 29, 1984. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and want more, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any videos. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.